The Texas wind swept over flat ground with dust and dry impatience. Seagoville by the highway looked like a school or a hospital, red brick, orderly windows, level yards. Built in 1941 as a women's rehabilitation facility, it was meant to reform those who had made mistakes. War bent the vocabulary. By the spring of 1942, it had been absorbed into the Department of Justice detention system and placed under immigration authorities. People stopped speaking of charges and used a colder label instead: enemy alien. You were not a soldier disarmed on a battlefield. There was no moment of surrender, no camera catching raised hands. Still, you were taken, registered, and assigned a bed as if your life could be sorted into a chart. Ayako arrived holding her son's hand, his shoes still muddy from their doorstep. Before she left home, soup had been simmering on the gas stove. The lid had trembled softly. She remembered thinking she should go back and turn off the flame, but someone urged her to hurry, not angrily, just firmly, as if time itself belonged to someone else now. Her son Ken was 7, newly proud of writing his name neatly. In the car, he kept asking where they were going, where his father was, why his mother would not talk. Ayako tried to answer, but every answer tore in her mouth. All she could say was, "We'll be home soon," and she no longer knew whether home was a place or only a hope. At the camp, laughter appeared again. Children ran, fell, rose, and ran again, as if a fence could not change the size of the sky. Adults heard the fence and thought command. Children heard it and thought line. Ayako learned her own stubbornness. In a place where there should be no home, to hold one up anyway. She washed clothes until they were clean, combed Ken's hair straight, made their bed as if it were a real bedroom. She drilled small rules into the day. Brush your teeth, hold your bowl steady, write your strokes straight. If the rules still existed, the world might not fully come apart. People in the camp came from many places, including farther south, brought through Latin America in stages. The corridors carried mixed languages and mixed accents. English came in several rhythms, Spanish stayed low in certain corners, and Japanese tended to soften at night, as if softness might be less likely to be misunderstood. To children, it meant new classmates. To mothers, it meant not knowing what category had been stamped onto your life. Outside, people sometimes called them prisoners of war. The phrase made it sound like a fight between soldiers, with the defeated locked up and the victors standing guard. But Ayako knew she was not a prisoner. She had never fired a gun. She had never chosen a side. She was a mother, an immigrant's wife, a name placed on a list. The system preferred forms. Forms turned people into a line of text: name, age, birthplace, nationality, relation. In the relation box it said husband, father, brother. Yet no one could tell you which room they were in, which camp, which road. Letters went out and came back slowly. Sometimes they returned with lines crossed out, a reminder that even longing required permission. Ken learned a new word: alien. At first he thought it meant a creature from the sky. Later he learned it meant outsider. He asked, "Mom, am I an outsider?" Ayako paused, then said, "You are my child," as if that answer could resist the name being pressed onto him. There was a woman everyone called Rosa, from a Spanish-speaking country to the south. She held her child too tightly, as if loosening her arms might let a clerk take the child away. Rosa said something Ayako never forgot. "I wasn't taken from my home. I was taken from someone else's decision." In the yard, the children drew maps with pebbles, and in the end they always drew a door. Beyond it was the home they imagined: a kitchen, a bed, the outline of a father. Sometimes they argued about whether the door should face east or west, as if direction could decide return. Meanwhile, rumors moved through the barracks. Some people would be sent away, sent back. Sent where? No one could finish. The more versions there were, the more real the fear became. because you did not know which one to fear. Ayako found herself afraid of the future more than the present because the present, at least, had routine. So she began one ritual she could control. Every night she told Ken the same story. A road, a light at the end, someone waiting for them to come home. Each time he asked who was waiting. Each time she said, tomorrow, speaking the word as if it were a person you could trust. Then the list came, pinned to the bulletin board at the end of the corridor. The paper was thin enough to tear in a breeze, yet what it decided sat in the body like stone. One afternoon, several names were circled. After the crowd thinned, Ayako saw Rosa standing still, as if she had forgotten how to walk. Rosa's child tugged at her sleeve and asked if they were going on a trip. Rosa crouched, tied the child's shoelaces very tight, then looked up at Ayako, asking for witness, remember that I was here. On another evening, Ayako took Ken to the board and found the corridor packed. Some stood close, afraid of missing a detail. Some stood far, afraid of understanding. Ken asked what they were looking at. Ayako saw a few lines of instruction and felt with sudden clarity that the worst fear was not confinement but disposal. Confinement kept you in one place. Disposal could mean transfer, repatriation, exchange, separation. A family could be reassigned like a unit on a form. That night, Ken slept lightly. He dreamed his father opened the front door carrying the smell of food. Footsteps hurried past in the corridor and a name was called. Ken jerked upright. Is that Dad? Ayako pressed him back onto the pillow. No, sleep. She stayed awake, listening to the footsteps fade as if they were dragging some family away. The next morning, a familiar surname appeared on the list. Not Ayako's, but the woman in the bed beside hers. The woman held her daughter and opened and closed her duffel bag. As if the motion itself could make an answer appear, she asked the same question again and again. Could she take her child with her? No one gave a clear reply. Someone said yes, someone said no, someone said wait for notice. Wait for notice was a wall. Ken watched the woman's hand shake. Children do not remember agencies or dates, but they remember a mother's hand. That day, the hand that usually tied laces and wiped mouths could not stop trembling. This was the first crisis. Separation. Delivered without gunfire, without shouting, by a sheet of paper that refused to explain itself. The second crisis reached the people with keys. Miller, a low-level administrator, lived by procedure. Check locks, count heads, sign, stamp. One day he found Ken pale and sweating, and Ayako said the boy had run a fever all night. Could they go to the infirmary first? The rule was register, wait, get approval. Miller hesitated, then walked them to the infirmary anyway and filled out the forms afterward. Ayako did not thank him. She was too tired. Even gratitude felt like extra effort. But she remembered the seam in the iron, the proof that the system could bend even slightly. And because it could bend, it was harder not to notice how often it chose not to. Miller remembered too. Back in his office, his palms were wet, and the phrase defend the nation sounded less certain. What was he defending, an abstract safety or the decency of still seeing a child? In the summer of 1945, the camp closed. The wire and the paperwork did not vanish overnight, but the word closed was like a door cracked open. Some people left, some were transferred, some were sent back to an original place that no longer felt familiar. Some returned to familiar cities and found familiar crowds looking away. The war ended, but the label did not necessarily end. When Ken walked out through the gate, sunlight hit his face and he squinted as if learning to see farther. Ayako held his hand and walked slowly, half afraid someone would call them back. After they had gone far enough, Ken asked, "Are we home?" Ayako stopped, thought, and said, "We're on the way." Years later, archives would record dates and record numbers, proof that it happened. But paper cannot write the heartbeat that follows nighttime footsteps, the force of a mother's hand on a child's pillow, or what a child is laughing at behind barbed wire. So the story returns to its question: must the border of national security pass through a child's bed? And when peace arrives, who puts mothers and children back into the position of being human?